Hey guys, it's Solar. How's it going? Today we're going to have a look at some color correction. I have this clip here which I shot out the window of a car while we were driving around in the Swiss Alps, and it's not much for footage, but again, it's footage that I own, so we can use it. And this is straight out of a 7D, so kind of like just a mob file, H.264 encoded. The kind of stuff that you're going to get out of a DSLR camera, so I figured it'd be quite a good example to show what we could do in terms of color correction. So as we're moving down the filters here, I've skipped Cinema 4D for now because I'll go back to that because I don't really use that plugin ever so much, so I'll probably do a bit of research into how it works more fully before I kind of dive into that one. But if we come into color correction, we'll see we have a ton, and I mean literally a ton of filters here, to the point where I hate these little panels, to the point where like some of these might be confusing, like, and so you'll see little 16, like if we look at some of the others, by the way, this isn't something that I've always explained, so I'm just going to explain it now. If you see an 8 to 16 or a 32, this refers to the color depth that you have your document in. So if we look up here at the info panel as I'm moving around, we have RGB values, so we have red, green and blue, and so every color on your screen is made up of basically a shade of green, blue and red, that's how colors work. If I switch this to 16 by pressing Alt, you're going to see we have far more detailed color information, so now it goes up to 17,000 and all the way up to 32, and then with 32 bits, this is what's called floats. So your images during 8 and 16 are clipped. They basically, so if we come up here and have a look at this footage, now this footage is not raw footage, so it's been clipped at the maximum values. If we look at 32768, that's the maximum a white can be. With float, one, that value is interpreted as 1, but you can actually go above 1, and so colors, if you've ever worked with raw camera photos, you'll know what I mean, because if I try bring in one of my raw images here, and let's just choose this one. So we're going to get the raw camera dialog, which, if you've seen my Photoshop tutorials, you will be very much aware of what this does. But having that raw footage, so this is shot in RAW, so this would be a 32-bit image. And what this means is that if we look at the white values up here, I can bring the exposure down and reveal all this detail. But at the same time, there's lots of details in the blacks as well, and this kind of level of control is only accessible when you're playing in 32 bits. But again, your footage has to be raw. This footage is not raw, so there's absolutely no point in being in it. But if you see numbers next to your plugins, this means that levels and color and everything will work at up to 16 bits. Means when it goes up to, if you go up to 32, it won't work as well. Only the ones that have 32 will work properly at 32 bits. So the classics like the curves and hopefully levels, I believe, levels as well, are two such examples of filters that work properly at all the way up at 32. But this is not really that important, but it might be if you're actually coming to grade footage, so it's kind of good to know. So the first three you've got are the auto. Now what these will do is basically simple as, if you drop them on, After Effects is going to guess at what you want the colors to be. And you can raise the blacks and the whites, but it's basically going to just attempt to color correct it without asking you for your opinion, basically. So if I come to blend, you'll see what it's done. It's kind of added some more contrast, which has added some more saturation to our colors. And I never use these three, so I'm just going to skip over those pretty quick. Black and white is quite useful because as opposed to, we have other ways of making our footage black and white in here. I mean, there's a million ways you can do it. You can add a tint, which basically allows you to add two colors, and by default you have white for the whites and black for the darks, and so everything in between is a shade of gray. But you can use it to only slightly tint stuff, and you can swap these around and have this kind of weird inverted color palette. But you can also dial this in, which makes it kind of slightly more useful than it used to be. But you can also go to hue saturation, drop that on here, and just pull all the saturation out of your image, which does exactly the same thing. But the reason I would use black and white if you're ever going into making things grayscale, especially if you're making a matte, is that it allows you to dial like what colors are how dark. So here we could have our reds, and our reds at the moment, we can pull them all the way up to bright, or we can pull them, you know, all the way down to dark, and so we can give this house a completely different feel based on just messing about with that. And you know, do we want our yellows? This is how you would stylize something like if you had sand and you wanted to make the sand black. You know, you would try and isolate the color range that the sand is in, and then you can essentially just by moving our greens and our yellows, which is, you know, the main two colors that are making up our field, just by manipulating those two, we can make the kind of sand here kind of dark. So the grass, sorry. But this is a really useful plugin. As you can see here, most of our trees appear to be in the cyan range. Might look green to us, but apparently we're kind of edging on blues up there. And you can also see here the problem with when you have compressed footage. So we're getting all these cubing, and this is just literally down to the camera we used and the way in which the footage has been encoded, which is H.264. You can get kind of plugins for your camera, so you can capture in RAW, and if you captured in RAW, you're going to get like way less artifacting and this kind of stuff. So that's something to bear in mind if you're using a camera. So black and white, super useful. You can also tint everything in the end if that's something you want to do. Again, there's about 15-16 different ways to tint your footage, so that would be one of them. Brightness and contrast is like really simple. It's literally like, do I want to just, it does almost what auto levels does, and just increases that, and brightness brings everything down. I almost never use this. I think what I should do before going through all the rest of these is just tell you that the only two you're ever really going to need are levels and curves. So let me just go into those in more detail. Curves is basically you get this square grid and this line. This line is your color curve. If you can add different points to it, like 1, 2, 3, 4. If you bring a point up, you're going to brighten the image. If you bring a point down, you're going to darken. Now where you are in the curve is essentially what part of the image. So up here we have our whites. So if I move our whites up, we're making everything brighter, right? So if we bring that up, if we bring this point down, we're basically making everything darker. It's quite simple. And down here we have our black point. So if we lift this, we're going to make our blacks lighter all the way up to white. And again, if we move it right, we're going to make everything darker. So that's the basics of curves. I mean, when you come to this and want to add some contrast, typically you'll make your brights brighter, and you could make your darks darker, which will increase the saturation also. This is typically known as an S-curve in the kind of editing world, and you can do reverse S-curves to kind of reduce contrast, which kind of gives you this look. But that, again, it depends on the look you're trying to go for. What's great about this though is if you really wanted to come into detail, they've made this the option to make this thing like super big, so you can really come in and really like tweak tiny parts of this curve to point. You can smooth the curve out because you can also draw it. So if you change from the points to the pen, you can literally attempt to draw it. I typically never do this, but just know it's there as an option. You can reset it. You can import curves. So yeah, curves is literally like one of the most, if not the most, it's like 99% of the time if I want to do color correction, I'll just do it with curves, because you can do everything. You can, like, we don't have much in our red channel here, but if we come to our greens and we want to make our greens brighter and maybe darker, so here we can add interesting looks by, so we're adding greens to the brights, which is when we move up, but then in our darker areas we're kind of reducing it, so we're getting this kind of teal tint. And then you can like add red here to the darks by raising it. So now we're adding, in all this darker area, we're adding red. And typically if you want to create those kind of Instagram looks, you would raise the black point of like the blue channel or the red channel, and also in the very brightest areas, if we remove blue, we're going to get a yellow tint, because all that's left is red and green, and that will create this kind of like yellowish tint. And so and also if we raise the blues in the bottom end here, we're going to get this kind of interesting Instagrammy looks. So literally you can get most of the looks that you're after just by moving these curves around and playing with them, and you can always just hit reset if you want to. So really useful. Levels does kind of the same thing, you know. You can, this is your bright point, this is your dark point. It's good because you got your overall brightness here and darkness. You've got your gamma, which is the middle part, and yeah, and you can literally, oops, change that back to 1, and yeah, you can clip them. Obviously, again, this is going to depend on if you're in 32 bits or not, so you can decide whether the colors clip at 1 or not. So you can basically control the behavior, and that's the way levels is a bit more powerful than curves. But typically I would use curves because I almost never have raw video footage to play with. So, and you've got to be aware, if you're in 16 and then 32 bits for your workspace, your project is going to be a lot slower because there's a lot more colors to calculate. So if we look at other ones here that we have to play with, exposure is one I would use. Sometimes I use this just to do like little flashes. So literally like keyframing it over like 1 or just a little flash, and then come back and then switch it back to 0. And then if we copy and paste that a few times, you're going to get these kind of like mini flashes, which I use quite a lot when I was editing Halo and stuff. There's some really interesting stuff. If you know, if you remember what gradient maps do from our Photoshop videos, there's something in here called Colorama. And so Colorama is really interesting in that it gives you a ramp. So this, by default, you get this kind of trippy, really weird and pointless one. But if we change this to something like a ramp red, this is going to give us the kind of like super stylized look. So what it's doing is we've got 2 colors here. We've got red here is basically the brightest point in the video, and then the black one is basically, so if we it's really fiddly though to kind of choose your black and your white point. So if I click on the black, this is our darkest color, and I can change it by coming to here, maybe change it to a blue, and so now our blacks are blue and then our reds are the brightest color. And what we can do is like maybe move the reds down and maybe add like a white to the highlights. So basically the closer you get to the top on the left side, the closer you get to the highlights, and then on the right side you've got your darks basically, and you can create these kind of super trippy looks. Like this could be really cool stylized kind of like video game look almost. And obviously it's interpreting between red and blue here to make this purple, but we could change that to be orange if we want to. And you can see how this is absolutely super powerful. Cycling the repetition just makes this like more trippy, because it basically repeats this like 11 times over the black to white gradient. And then you can get the intensity from different color channels, which will, you know, apply it in slightly different ways. And in the same, you can clamp the colors in terms of the way they're added. You can screen them on, not really doing much here. You can keyframe this phase shift to have this kind of like almost have the colors like waving through the landscapes. That's really cool. And there's lots of like, you know, there's lots of like cool presets in here. And remember that because there's the compositing, if we come down to compositing options down here, you can also dial this effect in now, you know, at different levels. So you might not want to use it 100%, but if we apply this slightly, we've got this kind of like slightly Western look going on, and you know, this might be too extreme, but somewhere like halfway in between might be actually just what you need for a kind of retro look. And you know, there's so many options in here. I'd just recommend playing with them. And yeah, I think that's most of the ones I wanted to cover, to be honest. I've already gone on quite a lot. Another one I would be aware of is toner, which allows you to tone the brights, the mids and the darks. By choosing duotone, you're going to get that tint effect, which I've shown you through about 4 different plugins. But if you come up to like tritone, it allows you to tone the lights, the darks and the mids. So I can make the whites like red, and then I can make the mids like orange, and the darks maybe like some kind of like blue. And I've just basically recreated the thing we had in Colorama, but with less control, because we're only controlling the lights, darks and mids. Colorama is a lot more powerful because you have the whole wheel to play with. So that's kind of worth noting. Again though, you can dial the effect in here or through compositing options, which is kind of useful. Last but not least, I think I'll show you the leaf color one, because this leaf color is actually pretty cool. So this allows you to select a color, and I believe, I can't remember how this works exactly, but this is how they do the kind of Sin City tolerance effect. I'm gonna see if I can. I can't remember how this works. Okay, well maybe this wasn't. I could have swore this was the way that you isolated certain colors and desaturated the whole video, but it doesn't appear to be working for this. So if we look down here, so basically what's happening is if we turn the tolerance down, alright, okay, I had the tolerance too high. Yeah, so leaf color basically allows you to keep one color and then kind of like attempt to desaturate everything else. So if we make the color that we want to leave this kind of green, and then we decolor everything else and then bring the tolerance down, you're going to see that if I toggle this on and off, it's kind of, I've got the softness kind of high here, but if I tweak this ever so slightly, and you've really got to play with this, it's kind of really picky. But we can see now we've left the green in here and we've desaturated everything else up here. So now the only color that's going to be in your video is the green, and this is a kind of similar way to how they did the Sin City effect, where they leave certain colors isolated, and obviously they do it in a way more complex and accurate way, but you can actually like stack 1 or 2 of these and then slowly pick out colors and isolate basically just the color you want to leave, which is kind of cool. So yeah, definitely worth checking that out. But I'm going to stop now because there's those are the main kind of color correction plugins I've seen. As you can see, I could literally spend like about a week going through all of these, but those are the ones that I use the most and find the most useful. So I hope you guys do too, and have fun with your color correction. I've also done another video like back in the day in the montage series where I went through some more of these plugins. So if you're kind of more interested about the color correction side of it, please go check that out. I'll try and link it at some point on the video. Thanks for watching guys, and I'll see you soon.